de cooperar en la construcción en nuestro hemisferio de sociedades más justas y prósperas.
Porque yo estoy cierto.
For 2 days, he sat at the conference table in Punta del Este, waiting and listening. As the anchor man in the chain of presidential speakers, he knew that when he turned on his microphone, the words that he used would shape the hopes and aspirations of over 250 million Latin Americans. Yet few there could have possibly guessed that many of these same words would take on a deeper and more prophetic significance for the Johnson administration before the month of April was over.
Now, we must measure the progress we have made. We must name the barriers that still stand between us and the fulfillment of our dream. Then, we must put in motion plans that will set us firmly on the way toward the proud destiny that is our people's right. We no longer inhabit a new world. We cannot escape from our problems as the first Americans could in the vastness of an uncharted hemisphere. If we are to grow and prosper, we must face the problems of our maturity, and we must do it both boldly and wisely, and we must face them now. If we do, we can create a new America where the best in man may flourish in freedom and in dignity. If we neglect the planning, if we ignore the commitments that it requires, if our rhetoric is not followed by action, we shall fail not only the Americans of this generation, but hundreds of millions to come.
Late on the night of March 31st, President Johnson swept an entire contingent of Latin American ambassadors and their wives aboard Air Force One for a weekend visit to the city of San Antonio and a Saturday afternoon barbecue at the LBJ Ranch. By April 12th, President Johnson would be in Punta del Este, Uruguay, for a 3-day meeting with the presidents of 19 Latin American republics. While there, he would ask his fellow leaders to endorse the idea of a Latin American common market. As an organization, the Common Market would eventually unite the 22 non-communist republics from the Rio Grande to Cape Horn into one gigantic, barriers-down trading area. Even on paper, the mission took on the air of an exciting gamble. If it worked, it could become the most daring innovation in economic and social reform ever undertaken in the Western Hemisphere. Feeling as he did about the meeting in Punta del Este, President Johnson had asked Congress for a special congressional resolution which pledged $1.5 billion to Latin America over a 5-year period. To qualify for the aid, the Latin American community would have to forge ahead with the common market idea, as well as related social and economic reforms. On March 23rd, the House of Representatives passed the resolution by a margin of nearly 2-1. By Saturday, April the 1st, only the Senate version remained in question. Whatever the outcome, the answer was at least 48 hours away. Time enough for the president and his guests to enjoy the pleasures of a weekend and barbecue, Texas style. On Monday, April 3rd, President Cevdet Sunay of Turkey arrived in Washington for a two-day round of talks with President Johnson. On their agenda, a review of Turkey's economic development, a look at the Greek and Turkish conflict on the island of Cyprus, and an evaluation of the role played by both countries in the NATO defense alliance. The 3rd was also the day that the Senate version of the Latin American resolution hit the front pages of newspapers across the country. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee had changed the tenor of the resolution itself. All references to the common market were dropped, and Congress's power to authorize and appropriate foreign aid funds was sharply and pointedly emphasized. As interpreted by a few of the administration's more prominent critics, the House version would have given the president the same sweeping powers as the 1964 Gulf of Tonkin resolution. This reference to the war in Vietnam would draw eventual comment from the president during his talks with Sunay.
This is the anniversary of the Truman Doctrine, 20 years ago, when President Truman called upon the American people to rally in the defense of freedom of Greece and Turkey. And there was a great deal of criticism in this land about that decision. Mr. Truman was accused of arrogance, of wanting to play world policeman. Some refused to believe this. Indeed, one of the proud moments of my life was on May the 7th, 1947, when I rose in the House to support President Truman and his supposedly disastrous policy of containment. Tonight, as we meet here in the White House, Greece and Turkey and Korea are taken for granted as dynamic, freedom-loving nations. And I hazard the guess that in 20 years, the Republic of Vietnam will similarly be taken for granted.
Despite efforts by several prominent senators to move for passage of a stronger Latin American resolution before the week was over, an impasse on an unrelated presidential campaign financing issue, and a 3-day Senate recess would virtually rule out any possible action before the president left for Punta del Este. On Monday, April 10th, President and Mrs. Johnson welcomed Vice President and Mrs. Humphrey back to Washington after their 2-week 7-nation tour of Western Europe. In a sense, the Vice President's journey was the perfect counterpoint to President Johnson's forthcoming trip to Punta del Este.
Between us, we will then have shared within a few weeks a degree of consultation and discussion with other nations that's unequaled, so far as I can recall, in American history.
Now, the purpose of my mission was to listen, to look, and to learn, and where if called upon, to explain. In so doing, I was given the opportunity to see Europe as it is more than 2 decades after the end of World War II, 20 years after the inception of the Marshall Plan, and 10 years after the signing of the Rome Treaties. I saw a new Western Europe that has achieved an unprecedented degree of well-being, prosperity and security, and an increased sense of identity and pride. That Europe, Mr. President, is testimony to the soundness of our policies, past and present, and to the genius and the industry of the people and of the nations of that continent.
For a time during the second week in April, it appeared that the nation was headed for a huge and crippling transportation strike. Trucks all over the country had stopped running due to a large industry lockout. and 138 railroads were on the verge of a shutdown. Most of the truckers would go back to work within 3 days. But on April 10th, the 60-day no-strike injunction provided under the Railway Labor Act had already run its full course. On Thursday the 13th, 137,000 shop workers, mechanics, and powerhouse employees were scheduled to begin a walkout. The question was how to avoid it. If it started and lasted for 30 days, unemployment would jump to 15%. The gross national product could suffer a $100 billion loss. If prolonged, it could break the nation's prosperity and pyramid the loss in goods, services, and income. Another factor was the impact of such a strike on defense production and the shipment time of goods and ammunition to the troops in Vietnam. After a weekend of meetings with some of his closest advisors, the president recommended special legislation from Congress, extending the strike deadline by another 20 days. If the resolution passed, it was to be cleared and flown to Latin America for his signature before 12:01 a.m. on Thursday. With his flight to South America only hours away, President Johnson took time to inaugurate the 1967 baseball season as he escorted Senator Margaret Chase Smith to opening day at D.C. Stadium. As one sports writer put it later, the Senators took it on the nose from the Yanks. But the sports world had suddenly discovered a president with a good, high, hard fastball. On the morning of April 11th, after an all-night flight, Air Force One approached the border between Brazil and Uruguay. The 5,000-mile journey to Punta del Este was almost over.
This is the first time that I step on South American soil. It is my very great privilege that it should be the land of Artigas. More than 150 years ago, Artigas said, "The cause of the people does not admit of the slightest delay." The same cause brings us to Punta del Este. 6 years ago, a great charter was written in Punta del Este. Under its banner, we have moved forward and made progress. We are demonstrating that free men working through institutions of representative democracy can best satisfy man's ambitions. The experience of the first 6 years of the alliance tells us where we must quicken the pace. Diligent work has gone on during the past year in preparing the program which the presidents will consider at this conference. This program is not a reaction to crisis, but it is a response of far-sighted Latin American leadership to the needs of present and future generations. I would repeat what I said to my fellow presidents last August. Move boldly along this path, and the United States will be at your side.
Just hours after his flight from Montevideo's Carrasco Airport to the chalet called Bolu, President Johnson had plunged into a round of intensive shirt-sleeve diplomacy sessions with a group of his fellow leaders. With men like his old friend Diaz Ordaz of Mexico and the Dominican Republic's President Balaguer, President Johnson had an opportunity to probe quietly away at the twin themes of self-help and Latin initiative. If the common market was to become a reality, the United States would have to underwrite the economic pact, but the basic drive would have to come from Latin America itself. On the question of trade, if they were to increase the volume and value of their exports, then the exports had to become competitive. And the best way for them to become competitive was through the economic integration efforts of a common market system. Between these private sessions and an informal gathering of the entire body of delegates on the following day, President Johnson took time out to sign Special Joint Resolution 65, extending the no-strike deadline in the American railway dispute for another 20 days. The resolution had been approved by an overwhelming majority in both the House and the Senate. The formal meeting of the American Chiefs of State convened on the evening of April 12th in the gambling room of the ornate San Rafael Hotel. Host President Oscar Gastido of Uruguay sounded the obligatory challenge of the conference in his opening remarks.
Pero esta ceremonia no supone una etapa terminal de nuestras tareas, sino que...
The agenda to be considered is of great importance. It stems from a very clear principle. All of us, united, can overcome the difficulties which separate us.
Llenos de esperanza de que en ella se reafirme la unidad de la América Latina.
The leaders of the Americas had met in Bogota and Punta del Este 6 years before to inaugurate one of the most audacious programs in the annals of mankind, the Alliance for Progress. Now they had come back to Punta del Este to assess their achievements and to take a hard look at their future obligations. While each leader would echo his concern over the trade problem, each would also stress one other singular point. All of the money given through the Alliance for Progress had not made their country's problems go away. To them, it was evident that Latin America's successful development would depend on the efforts of its individual governments working together, rather than on outside assistance. From his position as the anchor man in the chain of presidential speakers, President Johnson waited and listened. The question among the reporters and political observers was, what approach would he use? How would he sell the idea of fierce dedication to the undramatic day-to-day attainments of economic and social progress? Could the voice of dissent obstruct his message? The answer to these questions came shortly after 1 o'clock on the afternoon of the 13th.
I represent a nation committed by history, by national interest, and by simple friendship to the cause of progress in Latin America. But the assistance of my nation will be useful only as it reinforces your own determination and builds on your own achievements, and only as it is bound to the growing unity of our own hemisphere. Here are the tasks before us as I see it. First, you will be forging a great new common market, expanding your industrial base, increasing your participation in world trade, broadening economic opportunities for your people. Second, you will design and join together to build great multinational projects that will open up the inner frontiers of Latin America.
The Latin American common market, once achieved, would alter the entire economy of the hemisphere. Multinational projects would open the way for an unprecedented movement of power, people, and goods that would affect every sector of Latin America and provide the physical basis for the fulfillment of an old dream, Simón Bolívar's vision of continental unity. To help Latin America expand the volume and value of her exports, the United States would explore the idea of temporary preferential tariff advantages for all developing countries. President Johnson would also undertake the task of expanded assistance to Latin America in the fields of education, agriculture, and technology.
The time is now. The responsibility is ours. So let us declare the next 10 years the decade of urgency. Let us match our resolve and our resources to the common task until the dream of a new America is accomplished and is a reality in the lives of all of our people.
On the morning of April 14th, 19 chiefs of state affixed their signatures to a 10,000-word declaration aimed at helping Latin America solve her old problems of illiteracy, poverty, and narrow sectionalism. With the sole exception of one country, the leaders had decided on a 6-point attack. They agreed to create and support a Latin American common market, which would begin operations in 1970. To design and build a series of large multinational projects, which would open up the inner frontiers of the hemisphere. To expand Latin American trade. To eliminate unnecessary military spending. And to intensify the battle against illiteracy and disease, while modernizing agricultural and educational methods. And so the meeting of the American chiefs of state at Punta del Este came to a close. By all counts, it had been a success, and the man who had helped to promote its blueprint had proved to be far more simpatico than some of the Latin leaders had expected. At Punta del Este, as at other recent summit meetings in the Philippines and at Guam, the world had an opportunity to observe a significant change in presidential diplomacy. Although the realities of his country's economic and military power seemingly made it impossible for Lyndon Johnson to be one among equals, his personal approach and distinctive style in the conference halls had made him a true partner. Always recognized as a superb political technician, he had accomplished more by saying less and by listening. In the post-war years, the correct diplomatic stance for a conference-bound president was considered that of a benevolent benefactor or provider. Now the style was being changed. Perhaps in its own way, the change was a tribute to the success of United States foreign policy since World War II. A policy that encouraged the free nations of the world to reach out for dignity, diversity, and individuality. A policy that had spawned one of the unparalleled economic success stories of all time, the Republic of West Germany. On April 19th, the government at Bonn announced the death of the first Chancellor of West Germany, Konrad Adenauer. Four days later, 2 heads of state, 12 heads of government, and representatives from 61 nations began arriving in Germany to pay homage to the man who, more than any other, had shaped the destiny of post-war Europe. The trip was President Johnson's third outside of the United States within a year, and his first to Europe as chief executive. Paradoxically, Konrad Adenauer's death made the city of Bonn the scene of the most high-powered diplomacy in post-war German history. While there, President Johnson and his fellow leaders seized the opportunity to do something that world leaders don't often get a chance to do: discuss their problems face to face. On Tuesday the 25th, after a brief memorial service at the Bundestag, the chiefs of state, heads of government, and thousands of German citizens gathered beneath the twin spires of the Cologne Cathedral. Here, where Konrad Adenauer had first knelt as the city's mayor, a pontifical requiem mass was sung by Joseph Cardinal Frings. From Cologne, Konrad Adenauer's body was taken aboard a naval patrol boat for the trip up the Rhine River to his final resting place at Rhondorf. On Friday morning, President Johnson and Chancellor Kurt Kiesinger held their second and final conference. On their agenda was the entire spectrum of issues surrounding German and American relations. The nuclear non-proliferation treaty, United States troop withdrawal plans, the tariff negotiations going on in Geneva, and the progress of monetary reform.
The Chancellor reviewed the viewpoint of his people. In connection with all of those subjects, I attempted to tell him how we felt about them. It is clear from our discussion that the friendship that has existed between our two countries for more than the past 2 decades will be continued, that there will be a constant, complete, and full consultation between us before decisions by either of us.
As I have said before, in evaluating the enemy's strategy, it is evident to me that he believes our Achilles heel is our resolve. Your continued strong support is vital to the success of our mission. Our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardmen in Vietnam are the finest ever fielded by our nation.
During the last week in April, General William C. Westmoreland became the first military commander ever summoned from the battlefront in the midst of a war to make a personal report to the American people. His presence before a joint session of Congress on the 28th of the month was unprecedented. It was also during April that the words escalation and descent were undergoing interminable use in the press and over radio and television. Specifically, they had become synonymous with or symptomatic of any increase in the level of American fighting in Vietnam, especially the air war over the North. They had become one-way words on what was clearly a two-way street.
I do not expect every American to agree with each and every action that we who have responsibilities sometimes feel that we must take. But I do deeply believe that there will be less misunderstanding if the facts are better understood.
These men understand the conflict and their complex roles as fighters and as builders. They believe in what they're doing. They are determined to provide the shield of security behind which the Republic of Vietnam can develop and prosper. Can develop and prosper for its own sake and for the future and freedom of all Southeast Asia. Backed at home by resolve, confidence, patience, determination, and continued support, we will prevail in Vietnam over the communist aggressor.
And maybe somehow, some way, sometime, there's somebody that's willing to sit down at the table and talk instead of kill, discuss instead of fight, reason instead of murder. And when they do, I will be the first one at that table, wherever it is.